Good evening. If you could all find your way to your seats, please. My name's Jennifer Peterson, and I'm the Assistant Director of Next Generation here at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. It's my pleasure to thank you for joining us this evening, and I'd like to thank our members in attendance today. Your support is crucial to our work. If you are not a member, please consider joining. We have a wide range of levels for you to choose from. The Council is an independent and nonpartisan platform. Views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. I'd like to invite you to please silence your phones, but not your voices. This event is on the record. We are live streaming and we welcome your social media engagement. This evening, you'll be hearing from 8 members of the current class of emerging leaders. Since the inception of the Emerging Leaders Program in 2008, each year, the Council selects a cohort of Chicago's up-and-coming professionals to engage in a year of thought-provoking dialogue, global skills training, exposure to global leaders, and the opportunity to become a part of Chicago's global network. We will select the 10th class of emerging leaders very soon, and we'll announce this class over the summer. In the coming year, we will celebrate this program milestone through an array of special activities, so please stay tuned. I'd like to also say a special thank you and congratulations to all of the members of the Emerging Leaders community, both past and present. It's been an honor to get to know you this year. Now, back to this evening. Tonight's program is an opportunity for the class of 2018 to share a series of flash talks on an array of critical policy issues. These projects were developed over the course of the program year with feedback from the other ELs, EL mentors, and our program senior advisor, Cecile Shea. We are so thankful to the Council staff and community for their continued support of the Emerging Leaders Program. Before we begin our program this evening, I have a very few brief words of introduction of our speakers. First off, Amrit Kaur Akhri is the legal director of the Sikh Coalition, where she coordinates legal and policy initiatives to protect civil rights and leads efforts to engage and empower communities. Next, Lauren Bean Buita is the principal of Steely Consulting LLC, a policy consulting firm, and is the founder of Girls Security, a specialized national security education program for girls. Joel Ronal is the executive director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. He works regularly with the U.S. State Department, USAID, the National Security Council, and Congress on peace-building initiatives. Josh Ellis is a vice president at the Metropolitan Planning Council, where he directs many of MPC's urban and regional planning initiatives and manages their fellowship programs. Adrian Irma is a former legislative coordinator at the Cook County Bureau of Asset Management and sits on the executive board for New Leaders Council Chicago and on the advisory board of the Chicago Ideas Week Youth Program. Charmaine Cruz is a partner at the law firm of Barak Farazano. She is also a TEDx speaker and author and was named one of the nation's top 100 women to watch by Biz Women. Benjamin Levy is a gastroenterologist at Mount Sinai and Holy Cross Hospitals. He also serves as the head of gastroenterology education for residents and medical students from several international medical schools at Mount Sinai Hospital. And finally, Lisa Reula is the director of global programs at the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation, where she works to increase the area's economic competitiveness through international trade. I'll return at the end of the program to moderate the Q&A. For now, please join me in welcoming our first presenter, Amrit Kaur Akhri.
Good evening. I've been a prosecutor, a defense attorney representing police officers, and now a civil rights lawyer. And through all of that, there's one thing I've learned, and that's that we live in a society riddled with negative stereotypes, stigma, and bias. Some may even refer to it as an us versus them mentality. There's another thing I've learned, and that is that police officers are in a unique position to counter those stereotypes, to build trusting relationships with historically marginalized communities, and to create an environment that is cohesive. but only if they are properly trained to do so. So how do we accomplish this when there are currently no legislative requirements for police cultural competency training at the state or federal levels? Well, first, it's important to institute a mandated training requirement. I suggest a minimum of 20 hours annually. This type of training requires that officers engage with members and representatives of these marginalized communities to gain a historical perspective of where they come from. Further, we want these officers to create an environment where they're able to actively discuss policing strategies, the safety concerns of these communities, and goals for consistent engagement in the future. We want them to encourage and foster this interaction between marginalized groups, police, and the broader community moving forward. Police officers are expected to effectively serve and protect while engaging safely with people from all racial and ethnic backgrounds. And we as the general public expect an environment with police where we're treated fairly and where we are free from the fear of discrimination, excessive force, or a situation where we feel dismissed as crime victims. A 2017 study by the Pew Research Center shows that 61% of police officers do not feel that they are adequately trained to effectively police their communities. That same study shows that 72% of police officers want to be educated about the people and the cultures in the areas where they serve, and those trainings would make them more effective at maintaining public safety. Currently, police officers who are tasked with investigating crimes against historically marginalized groups have little to no training. Many of these crimes are bias-based or hate crimes. Last year, there were over 250,000 hate crimes that were committed in the United States. 50% of those were reported, and far fewer than that were classified as hate crimes because the officers that are tasked with investigating these types of incidents are not properly equipped to understand the culture and the communities within which they work. So clearly, ladies and gentlemen, this lack of cultural competency is a public safety issue. By instituting guidelines that require the type of educational training that I'm advocating for, we ensure that police officers gain historical perspective on these marginalized groups and the bias backlash that they're susceptible to. This one-on-one interaction, it's invaluable. It counters stereotypes, and it allows for the mutual outreach and interaction where both the police and the community feel that they can safely communicate and break down these stereotypes together. And down with the stereotypes go their fears and the implicit biases on all sides. That's also why cultural competency training should be conducted by members of the group that the training is focused on. It doesn't make sense that a Catholic priest would talk about why a Jewish or Sikh religious article of faith is an easy target for a hate crime. We need the people that live that discrimination day in and day out to explain who their community is and what stereotypes they face. Only then can police officers understand the vulnerabilities of that community. Also, this one-on-one interaction allows for prior negative experiences with members of these groups to be disassociated. Basically, we're asking that people take a step back and they disassociate the bad behavior of a person they may have engaged with in the past with the entire community based on this knowledge and this training. The reality is, crime doesn't just impact the individual, it impacts the entire community. This training has already led to bolstered trust, to positive interactions between minority groups, police, and the broader community. And we know that police officers want this training. So not only is cultural competency training critical to effective policing, maintaining public safety, and strategic policies, but it is also critical to eliminating us versus them and creating a we. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lauren Bean Puita to the stage.
Because my topic is election security, everything I say in the next 5 minutes might be outdated by the time I conclude my remarks. Yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security issued a statement that a new cybersecurity strategy was forthcoming. This was prompted in part by the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential campaign and election. This measure is a good indication that bipartisan efforts to secure U.S. elections are working. It cannot be overstated that bipartisan efforts to secure future U.S. elections must be supported, must be protected, and must be insulated for 3 reasons. The first is elections are highly partisan, and the forthcoming elections will be taking place under the looming shadow of the Russia investigation. Secondly, the threat remains, as indicated by the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the Director of National Intelligence over the last year. Russia, the threat posed by Russia, will not recede, and it will continue to pose a threat to U.S. elections going forward. Thirdly, continuing bipartisan efforts to secure U.S. elections sends a message to voters that our vote matters, and it's an assurance for the integrity of the vote. Russia brought to bear a powerful influence on the 2016 presidential election, both with the email hacking of the DNC server, as well as the scanning and probing activity of 22 confirmed states. Russia's intent is clear. It's no different, really, from its intent during the Cold War. However, obviously, the misinformation and propaganda techniques are different. Russia seeks to undermine a U.S. way of life, which is defined by democracy and elections, but as well by capitalism. What is more difficult for the U.S. to unravel at this point are Russia's capabilities, and this is due in part to the nature of technology, which can obscure efforts. If 2016 was a dry run, which we can now safely say it was, the United States can anticipate a threat attack strategy similar to those in the European Union, such as Estonia, Sweden, and Norway. A bipartisan strategy has 3 parts. All of these parts are intended to strengthen the capacity of states to detect threats to their voter technology, to respond to those threats, and to react when a threat occurs on one of their voter databases. 2 of these parts are underway. 1 of these parts has yet to be implemented. The first is funding. Congress has allocated $380 million to states to update their election infrastructure. This would include, for example, swapping paperless electronics with a voting system that allowed for a digital image scan of a vote, as well as a paper audit. The second part, in addition to funding, is intelligence information. The federal government must continue to coordinate with state and local election officials to ensure they acquire the necessary security clearance to have access to sensitive intelligence information, which would inform not only the understanding of threats to their voter databases, but also their capacity to respond. A third part, which has not been advanced in the U.S. for a couple of reasons, which include budgets as well as administrative reorganization, but has been the emphasis of response in the EU, is some type of societal resiliency strategy, which could look something like public education, media literacy. This is something that state election officials are well poised to advance. This can be an initiative that is executed in coordination with academic institutions or independent think tanks. These are all important measures: intelligence, funding, and public education, but I will conclude with a Russian proverb that was shared with me when I was 20, living in Wicker Park, which translates roughly to "stamp the spark before the fire." So while these measures are all very important, there is a broader question, which is, I'm sure, on the minds of several people, which is cyber defense versus cyber offense. Do you fight the fire, or do you attempt to contain the fire? And I believe that the U.S. must advance a more active cyber policy to ensure that future U.S. elections are protected.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joe Ronal to the stage.
So, for the first time since the Cold War, violence and violent conflicts are increasing. And yet there is no US strategy that cross-cuts across defense, state, the national security agencies that has a focus on how do we prevent violent conflicts. Even if there was a strategy, and there are currently efforts underway in Congress to create one, it would be insufficient. As while the US may be necessary in every conflict zone, they are very rarely sufficient as a sole actor in today's multipolar world in order to resolve or even tamper down conflicts alone. If we can't create a policy that helps mitigate violence and fragility by ourselves, then the correct answer many people would say is, well, let's look to our multilateral institutions like the United Nations and try and find ways to utilize them in order to help us deal with the complex challenges of today. Yet the mistrust of the United Nations, both at home here in the United States and abroad, not to mention an exorbitant 20% plus overhead fee that the UN charges for programmatic content, means that utilizing the current multilateral institutions isn't always applicable in different conflict zones. So when we're dealing with conflict prevention, and the aim is to create systemic change and to build resilient institutions that can survive political deadlock when leaders don't agree to a political solution or a peace plan, and you're trying to prevent violence that stops any conversation happening, what is the correct solution if we can't build our own one within the United States and the current multilateral institutions are incapable at times of playing a neutral role? The answer is that you can create these institutions with bespoke peace-building models. And I'll give you an example from one that started in 1986 that President Reagan and Speaker Tip O'Neill created, called the International Fund for Ireland. This was a fund started 12 years before the Good Friday Agreement and created complementary, legitimate, and flexible funding that today has prevented violence breaking out, even despite the challenges of the current contexts that are happening in Northern Ireland, given the UK's exit of the European Union. This fund combined congressional money, of which the Catholic community trusted, and Commonwealth money, of which the Protestant community trusted, in creating long-term approaches to both economic and civic programming to try and answer the question, what are we doing to make sure the next generation doesn't hate each other? These funds started 12 years before a peace process, and after the peace process happened in '97, changed their modality to work with those who were left out of the peace process. Those who are normally blockers because they don't see the benefits of peace because they themselves were active combatants. The funding was unique and successful because it leveraged the resources that each community saw as legitimate. And by doing so and creating something separate from a political process, it created an entity whose only mission wasn't to try and bring the parties back to the table, to a political compromise, but rather ask themselves the question, what are we doing to make sure the populations are ready for such a compromise? What are we doing to make sure that they can keep a compromise? And what are we doing to make sure that if the leaders become deadlocked, that the compromise doesn't dissipate? This model of bespoke peace-building funds where we utilize the US leverage alongside with allies or even opposing forces, but share a view that violence isn't the way forward, can be a model that we can actually create specific bespoke funds in different conflict zones to enable us to leverage US assistance so that we don't just think of things in silos. So we don't think, let's organize around humanitarian assistance and economics, but not civics. Let's organize around a political solution, but not that of disarmament. By creating bespoke models in each space, we create an institution that wakes up every day in each conflict zone that has legitimacy to ask themselves the question, what are we doing to make sure the next generation doesn't hate each other? This isn't fanciful thinking. It has happened before, not just in Ireland, but today in Colombia. There is a multi-trust fund being created with the help of those who set up the Irish Fund. It can work in the Middle East if we look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It can work even in spaces where we see complete intractable conflicts, such as Cyprus. This modality enables us to get over our own bureaucratic shortcomings. And rather than being idealistic about our own inabilities as a legislature and an executive to solve the world's problems, understands that the US has a vital role, but its role is best served when it leverages its resources, its capacities, and its expertise with those of others. Not in a complete universalist setting with one size fits all, but looking at what are the coalitions, whether they're in the Central African Republic or they're in Mali, that can be the exact right coalitions that are needed. Thanks very much.
Please welcome Adrian Irma to the stage.
Good evening, everybody. I'm really excited to join you this evening to discuss a topic that's really important to me, but also that I find incredibly disconcerting, and that's the fact that my people don't vote. And you're probably out there wondering, who are her people? Is it Black? Is it Latinx? Of course I'm talking about Americans. All Americans, regardless of race, creed, and political affiliation. In fact, roughly 50 to 55% of Americans show up at each presidential election. In the midterms, however, we rarely break a 40% turnout. 2008, in fact, was our most recent highest turnout election. It was also the most diverse American electorate we've seen, with 61% of voting eligible Americans casting a ballot. The number you'll see on your screen is a percentage of voting age population, which is lower because there's a number of different things that intersect with voter turnout and ability of an American to vote. Okay. Before that, it was in 1968, in Nixon versus Humphrey and Wallace, again at the 60% margin of voting eligible population. 2016, that diversity did not show up. In fact, white Americans showed up at virtually the same rate as for Romney in 2012, but we see a very precipitous drop-off of Black and Latino voters in that same election. In order for Americans to, in order for our democracy to be strong, to be an inclusive democracy, we have to have diversity showing up at the polls. If you look at this chart, everything on that side of 1920, it was an electorate of all white men. And I argue that our democracy, in order to be strong, needs to have a diverse electorate, and in order to produce candidates that address a broader spectrum of issues that are important to the American population. Voter turnout, voter satisfaction is super low. But in order for our democracy to be strong, we need to have a sense of investment and a sense of encouragement and belonging within our American electorate, and that's not currently happening. In fact, most Americans tie their right to vote intrinsically to their sense of freedom, but they're really unhappy with what they're seeing on their ballots. So how can we do better? There's a lot of ideas out there to address this low voter turnout, but one of these things, and what a lot of other countries have done to address low voter turnout, is compulsory voting. And to that I say yes, please. So if we compare the United States with other countries in the Americas that are democratic elections, Uruguay, that has compulsory voting, sees 97% voter turnout. Out of these 19 countries in the Americas, the United States is 15th in terms of voter turnout at 53%. Australia does this. Australia has a 30-year average voter turnout of 95%. 30-year average. Overwhelmingly, Australians really, really like, or are really okay with compulsory voting, and the young folks, age 18 to 24, they're totally cool with it. And I use totally cool because that's their language. So why would this be good for us? Because we're not the Latin Americas, we're not Australia. Well, better government, and increased accountability in our leadership and legitimacy of our leadership, and campaigns that are focused on the issues and not exorbitant amounts of money being focused on get out the vote. We're also going to see a greater sense of belonging, because when historically marginalized populations are turning out to vote because they see candidates representing issues and values that mean something and resonate with them, I mean, that alone, in my opinion, would be a strengthening of our democracy. And we can also see some revenue from enforcement of compulsory voting, if that's how we choose to enforce it. I'm against, by the way, jailing anybody for not voting. Okay, America is overall not very good at it. But the naysayers will say, oh, voting is a civic right, not a civic duty. It's a violation of constitutional rights. Well, to that I would say, what about this? And that? And this? Right? It does not cost too much money. It doesn't infringe on our freedom of speech. And, you know, if they don't like the party, they can go with a third party. But let's think about these benefits locally, right? Would aldermen pander to the huge developers if they knew that everyone was going to show up and vote for the kind of revitalization they really need? Would the state assembly pander to the likes of the NRA or the charter school lobbies if they knew that the people showing up had had enough? Do we really value our diversity and the issues that we care about most? Or are we content with the marginalization that occurs in this system today? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Josh Ellis to the stage.
Quick show of hands, anyone here who turned on a tap today or flushed a toilet without thinking about it twice? Hopefully it's everybody. Maybe some of you did think about it twice. That's a luxury we have here in the United States that a lot of other parts of the country don't have, and it's the product of a lot of expertise in water management that we don't do a good enough job deploying across the world. And I'm going to talk about how to untap that potential to help manage water conflicts abroad. The notion of water wars, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, gets a lot of press, but we haven't seen a lot of examples of it actually happening, as opposed to water conflict, such as what's going on in Cape Town right now with their day zero, potentially running out of water. Syria's civil war was in many ways sparked by a failure to manage a drought and a rush to the city, in a city that didn't have the water to provide it. We hear stories about private extraction of water creating conflict between corporations, ecosystems, and residents across the world. These sorts of conflicts pit people against each other and can lead to violence. The skill sets required to manage those are the same skill sets required to manage water utilities here in the United States. Can you manage a budget? Can you establish a revenue need? Can you establish rates? Can you plug holes in infrastructure? Can you develop new water supplies, new water sources? Fortunately for the United States, those are the skill sets that we have an abundance of all throughout the country at water utilities like our own here in Chicago. Unfortunately, these folks do not work for the US government and are not deployed abroad to manage these situations. So what I'm proposing tonight and would like to talk to you about is a water corps, for lack of a better term, that the US would develop from current or recently retired water management professionals and deploy abroad to provide deep ongoing technical assistance in hotspots where a lack of ability to provide water 24/7, 365, or basic sanitation is leading to systemic inability to develop economies, as well as the potential for conflict. The conflicts that I'm talking about are exacerbated in many ways by climate change. They're exacerbated by changes in agricultural and industrial production, rapid urbanization, and other things that we've seen here in the United States. Right? They lead to mass migrations, and we know from recent experience that mass migrations can put stress on national security systems, even national identities, and a whole host of other problems. The failure to provide basic sanitation increases the potential for pandemics. The inability to have sustainable economic development can breed resentment, hostility, and other problems. These are issues that threaten interests of the United States and its allies, and they are issues that we should address at the federal level. So the development of a water corps, not unlike the Peace Corps or other efforts, would be to find and mobilize individuals with water management backgrounds to deploy abroad in these situations. The current U.S. water management program abroad, which is run through USAID, focuses on 13 countries, largely in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. The current programming focuses on national level water strategy and large-scale agricultural development. These are not invaluable, and many of the federal agencies that work on these things, whether it's USAID, the Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the State Department, and others, provide a lot of skill set and a lot of value to help manage those things. But none of them are really trained in the nuts and bolts of making sure that those taps run and those toilets flush on a day-to-day basis, dependably for months and years to come. In contrast, we have water managers who make Atlanta a functioning, growing metropolitan region with essentially no water. We have water management professionals who make Los Angeles a functioning, growing metropolitan region with even less water. We have water management professionals who somehow make Las Vegas work with zero water, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. And crazily enough, they might go to the Stanley Cup this year, which is bizarre that there's even a hockey team there, which again speaks to their ability to provide water. So these skill sets can be deployed in other countries where the same types of efforts that went into managing Las Vegas, developing alternative water supplies, reuse of non-potable water, making sure that pricing is set to encourage conservation, are the same skill sets that can be used in Kinshasa, in Beirut, in Kabul, in all these regions of the world that we work in, but without working in the urban environment to make sure that the cities, the suburbs, and villages in these centers can continue to operate and function. There are precedents for this in law enforcement, where we deploy police officers abroad for cultural awareness training and helping set up law enforcement efforts elsewhere. I maintain that this would be an attractive option for water utilities. Many of folks that I know and work with are beat down by local politics and would welcome the chance for some creative outlets in other places, which might also show them some ways to do things better at home. I think this is an opportunity to bridge both cultural awareness and assisting these local water managers abroad with the technological innovation that we have here, and there are precedents in water management too. The variety of ways that we can pay for this, some of which is redeploying of existing resources, and another, potentially more creative way, is that these same water utilities often are seeking loans from the federal government and have to repay that loan with interest. Let's let these water utilities pay that interest instead of to the federal government, pay it through the staff time to deploy their folks abroad. I think this strategy, this water core approach, could be assistance in managing conflicts abroad and tapping the resources that we have sitting in water treatment plants like Jardine a couple blocks away to our national interest. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Charmaine Cruz to the stage.
Good evening. Today's America is more divided by race, social class, religious identity, and political affiliation than at almost any other time in our recent history. What's worse, each group feels as though they're the ones under attack, causing each of us to retreat more and more into our insular tribes, reducing dialogue and furthering these fractions and divisions. Right now, more than half of white Americans believe that whites have replaced blacks as the primary victims of discrimination. Meanwhile, more than 43% of African Americans do not believe they'll ever achieve equality in their own country. Hate crimes have risen by more than 20%. This, along with an ever-widening wealth gap, has resulted in a nation that's so divided it sometimes feels as though there are multiple Americas in one. My proposal is mandatory national service for all Americans ages 18 to 20, whether military or civil service. I believe that serving together as Americans from all different walks of life will encourage dialogue, promote understanding, and begin to heal our fractured nation in a manner that will actually promote our democracy. National service can include entry into any of the uniformed services, of course, as well as the Peace Corps, the AmeriCorps, any other equivalent program recognized for its innovative citizen problem solving. There are dozens of these: Teach for America, Habitat for Humanity, Jumpstart, and many others. Service should take place between 18 to 20 years of age, and the reason is that's when our young adult minds are most susceptible to change, to new perspectives. It's also before most participants would have entered university or begun working full-time or chosen to expand their family, making service more economically and socially viable during that time period. The benefits to society will be massive. The mutual understanding gained through years of working together despite our different backgrounds will result in a more functional democracy. But besides that, think of the workforce training the next generation of American leaders. Concrete benefits from the national service itself are also substantial. We will, of course, have a strengthened military, but the civil service, should our participants choose that, can result in advancing social innovation. It can increase health education, promote environmental stewardship, help to bridge the education gap, and so on and so forth. The participants themselves will also benefit tremendously. They'll be co-working and cohabitating with Americans from vastly different walks of life for years, likely in difficult living circumstances, sometimes involving rigorous physical labor or emotionally challenging days. This will teach them diplomacy and problem-solving skills, empathy and gratitude. We'll be creating young people that have work ethic, resilience, and grit of the sort that they simply don't now. And of course, on a more concrete level, many will be developing job skills that they can take to the workforce with them upon the conclusion of their service. Yes, there will be costs. Fees to maintain the program, housing stipends, medical insurance, postgraduate stipends, career support. But these costs are manageable. First, we have to consider the fact that the financial costs are significantly outweighed by the financial benefits. Imagine a country where volunteers are building your roads, and they're staffing your hospitals, and they're educating your children. There are tremendous financial benefits to that. But we can also manage costs through private sector investment. Right now, there's hundreds of millions of private sector dollars invested in the programs that I've mentioned. By expanding the programs, we can also expand the investment. We can also minimize costs. If you look at the AmeriCorps model alone, in the last year, AmeriCorps volunteers have trained and utilized over 4 million community volunteers. Think of the potential that Americans have to serve in that capacity. I ask you to imagine the possibilities. Imagine an America where national service is a core component of the education of each American, where Americans work together every day for years, regardless of racial, economic, religious, or political background. I ask you to imagine the impact that this might have. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Benjamin Levy to the stage.
As a physician who has worked in 14 hospitals throughout the United States during my medical training, I have seen firsthand how diverse the healthcare system in America truly is. For years, immigrants have significantly strengthened our healthcare workforce. Immigrants are some of the hardest working people in medicine today. They've had to overcome language, cultural, and financial barriers to become nurses, doctors, and researchers to help our country. Without the influx of immigrants into America over the past 50 years, we would have an even greater shortage of physicians and nurses in America today. The United States should avoid actions that would lower the number of non-citizen physicians, medical workers, and scientists from entering and working in America. Americans should consider opposing President Trump's proposed immigration restrictions because the foundation of our healthcare system in 2018 is based upon foreign-born physicians, nurses, pharmacists, and researchers helping all of us. According to the Migration Policy Institute, 27% of physicians and surgeons in the United States today are foreign-born. At my hospital, Mount Sinai in Chicago, approximately 2/3 of the physicians are foreign-born. Each year, increasing numbers of medical residents are coming from foreign countries. Many residency programs actually prefer matching foreign-trained medical doctors because of their ability to select the cream of the crop, the top 1% of doctors who score really high on the USMLE boards. My internal medicine residency class at the University of Arizona, now this is back in 2011 when I graduated, had 5 residents from Jordan, 2 residents from Syria, 2 from Pakistan, 1 from Iran, 1 from Mexico, and 1 from China. That's 12 out of 18 of us. 100% of these internal medicine residents now practice medicine in the United States, and many have gone to subspecialty fellowships such as cardiology, oncology, and neurology. My friend Borna is actually a neurologist here at Northwestern in Chicago. Banning these foreign-born doctors from practicing medicine in America would be a major blow to healthcare. We would be banning some of the smartest physicians in our workforce. Immigration restrictions will cause increased wait times in hospitals and in clinics, and these restrictions would also discourage foreign-trained doctors from even considering practicing medicine in the United States. The U.S. relies on doctors and nurses from foreign countries to staff our hospitals and clinics, especially in rural settings. The United States attracts the best medical students from other countries who score in the top 1 to 5% on the boards. Now, there are 3 parts of the boards. There's step 1, there's step 2. Actually, step 2 has 2 parts. There's a written and a physical exam section. And then there's step 3 is actually a 2-day exam. Many foreign-born physicians practice medicine in much-needed rural settings and/or go into academic medicine. The American Association of Medical Colleges states that over 500 applicants to residency training programs in the United States annually come from the 8 countries that President Trump's travel ban included in his executive order. These countries include North Korea, Iran, Syria, Venezuela, Libya, Chad, Yemen, and Somalia. Now keep in mind that 3 residents in my internal medicine class would have been prevented from completing their residency in the United States. These 3 individuals are some of the smartest physicians that I've ever worked with. The H-1B visa program allows hospitals and clinics to staff approximately 10,500 physician positions in the United States. Yet the Trump administration has indicated that it hopes to reduce the number of visas approved in the future. Foreign-born physicians disproportionately choose primary care. 46% of foreign-born immigrant physicians and surgeons pursue work in internal medicine where there are vast shortages of practitioners, unfortunately. The AAMC also estimates that we will have a deficiency of approximately 8,000 primary care physicians in 10 years. The proposed travel bans would exacerbate the primary care physician shortages in areas of the country where doctors are truly needed the most. America leads the world in medical research, and academic physicians are extremely important for drug discovery. Academic physicians in America disproportionately come from other countries. Thus, immigration is key to medical research, drug discovery, drug research, drug testing, and medical breakthroughs that are used in both the United States and worldwide. It's interesting, 18% of academic physicians in America are born abroad. In addition to that, 42% of researchers at the top 7 cancer research centers in this country are foreign-born. An impressive percentage considering that only 13% of the US population is foreign-born. What about our local hospitals? The core staff at hospitals in the United States are truly dependent upon immigrants. 15% of registered nurses in America are immigrants. America has greatly benefited from doctors and researchers immigrating to this country. We should be encouraging the top minds of the world to join us and to practice medicine with us, and to perform medical research in the United States and help lead the world in medical discovery. Staffing at hospitals and clinics in America are highly dependent upon the influx of immigrant physicians and nurses. Their expertise helps to improve the delivery of healthcare across this country and helps us extend lives. Thank you.
Please welcome our final speaker, Lisa Rayula, to the stage.
Last one. Despite the volume of headlines dedicated to Amazon's search for a second headquarters, the majority of job creation in a metro area does not come from business attraction deals. Business attraction typically accounts for only 3% of job growth per year. The bulk of job creation in a metro area comes from growth of existing companies. Today, I'm going to talk about one way we can grow existing companies in our region by increasing their exports or sales of goods and services overseas. In Chicago, public sector stakeholders need to prioritize exports from small and medium-sized businesses to increase their sales and grow local jobs. To do so, we should consolidate fragmented efforts, leverage the participation of other global cities, and develop a cohesive brand identity to better market the region overseas. Today, when I talk about the Chicago region, I mean the city and 7 surrounding collar counties in northeastern Illinois. So why are exports, particularly those from small businesses, important to our local economy? You've all likely heard the oft-repeated statistic that over 95% of the world's consumers are actually located outside of US borders. By 2050, 85% of global middle-class consumption will take place overseas, in countries like Brazil, China, and India. To grow, Chicago businesses need to look overseas, yes, but particularly to emerging markets to find their next customers. There is untapped opportunity for small businesses from the Chicago region in international trade. Some numbers for you. There are 11,000 manufacturing firms located here and 32,000 services firms. 95% of these businesses are actually classified as small or medium-sized because they have less than 500 employees. However, less than 5% of these firms actually export, and those that do are selling to only one market, typically Canada or Mexico. The region is the 4th largest exporter by value in the country. Some 200,000 jobs are directly supported by exports here. Those numbers may seem impressive, but when you think that they are the result of less than 5% of our businesses exporting, it's easy to see that there's major potential for growth. So if exporting is a good way to increase sales and grow local jobs, why are so many local businesses opting out of the opportunity? There are numerous barriers to export. Small businesses may not be aware of the existing resources that can help them sell overseas. They have a low appetite for risk. They have concerns about foreign exchange due to a strong dollar. They're not sure how to be compliant with foreign regulations, and they need to protect their valuable intellectual property. So what can we do here in Chicago to encourage exports and grow economic competitiveness? We should consolidate export assistance through regional collaboration. Rather than have the city and each of the counties tackle this issue on their own, we should find ways to work together across regional boundaries. We recently made major progress towards this goal in the formation of the new Chicago Regional Growth Corporation. The city and the counties of Cook, DuPage, Kane, Kendall, Lake, McHenry, and Will have developed an innovative regional platform to share resources and build the global capacity of businesses in our region. Second, we should leverage the ongoing work on global cities. Chicago is not the only metropolitan area struggling with how to include small businesses in international trade. We should work with and learn from places like San Diego and Atlanta, who have succeeded in elevating export as a strategic goal and forming international partnerships on industry clusters. And finally, we should develop a cohesive brand identity to better market our region as a whole with overseas customers. Our diverse market strengths are not well understood by trading partners. Deep dish pizza and Al Capone remain dominant images of Chicago overseas. Counties, municipalities, and cities all advertise separately at trade shows abroad. This causes duplication of effort and brand confusion. But by collaborating regionally, we can promote priority sectors like food manufacturing, metals manufacturing, and financial services to increase understanding of the assets that our region has to offer. In conclusion, the Chicago region should support economic growth through international trade by increasing exports of the small businesses that serve as the engine of our local economy. Through our new efforts at regional economic development, we can coordinate and consolidate the efforts of public and private sector stakeholders develop a cohesive brand identity to raise our profile overseas, and ultimately better support and expand the businesses that call this region their home. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our emerging leaders back to the stage.
Yay! Thank you all. I hope you all enjoyed those presentations. There was a lot of not blood or sweat, maybe some tears, but it was hopefully labors of love. We're gonna have a bit of time for audience Q&A, but just while you're getting your questions ready, I'm gonna ask our ELs, put them on the spot a little bit. I want you to think in 3 words, how would you describe your EL experience? So this is a 10-month-long program. We spend a lot of time together. We do skill development. We do leadership development.
Going in alphabetical order?
Oh. Adrian, whoever wants to start us off. Go for it, Adrian.
I would say, this is cheating, by the way, thought-provoking. 1. Encouraging and collaborative.
Okay, I'm gonna throw some levity into it because I'm gonna say pow interaction. I think that's all encompassing of really what it's been like with the networking and the relationship building and the exposure that we've gotten to different areas of thought, people of different backgrounds and different experiences.
That was 75 words.
I will say challenging, formative, and fun.
You know, all the good words have gone.
Joel, you're never short for good words.
I'd say community, a network, and fabulous. There you go. That's it.
Compelling, purposeful, and rosé.
We drank a lot. Yeah. I would say, profound personal relationships.
I would say friendships, learning, and experiences.
Great.
Humbling, challenging again, and fun. Really, really fun.
Great. All right, now I'd like to invite you all in the audience. I know we have a lot of supporters in the crowd. If you have any questions to any of our ELs here on stage about the project proposals they just presented, when we were in our EL session, some of those proposals were a little bit contentious. So I'm sure lots of you have questions on those projects. Maybe you have questions about the program in general. Any questions? Wow, a satisfied bunch. Yes, you here in the back.
My main question is to do with election hacking. Why would you say that in some cases it can be a challenge to get states to take it seriously? And why would you, and also in your opinion, why would you say that a segment of the population refuses to believe that our elections were hacked? Thank you.
I think I'll skip the latter. With respect to the former, I think states have been highly receptive to not only the threat that was posed to 22 states, which was confirmed, but several states are taking active measures and have already updated their election technology. So I think states are eager to coordinate with the federal government, both with respect to funding as well as the intelligence sharing. However, unfortunately, both of those processes are protracted, so states are becoming more frustrated, but as a result of that, they're pursuing efforts like working with the National Guard to kind of capitalize on their cybersecurity expertise. So I think states are quite responsive. With respect to the latter, I really don't have an answer or really want to speculate on that issue. So,
great. Any other questions? Yes, this gentleman here in the bluish jacket.
Hi, my question is on the civil service. So the place where I attended high school actually had a mandatory community service requirement, and the way it was carried out was effectively, I just needed a signature, right? I could have written anything as long as someone was willing to sign off. So my question is around, given that the macro goal was a unified nation and to kind of break down some of these barriers that divide us, which ways tactically would you ensure that people kind of went outside their comfort zones or their natural affinities where, you know, you maybe have someone in a wealthy suburb that's just kind of getting a form filled out and they're not necessarily serving alongside someone who's different from themselves?
I appreciate that question. I'm going to refuse to answer it. No, I'm kidding. Well, that's an excellent point. I think what you need to have is you need to have a number of approved programs that are in place. So it can't just be somebody signs a form for you, but it has to be, you know, if you have bone spurs and can't serve in the military, then you have to go do Teach for America for 2 years. That is a recognized program that is, you know, it is already designed in a particular way. People who enroll in the program are sent to a particular place in the country, which they have no choice in, and they're then required to work and live in that place particular hours, etc. So there will be a choice of programs to enter into, which I think is important. Some of us maybe are more eager than others to have our sons or daughters serve in the armed forces. But having said that, every program should be recognized and one of the mandated programs that are available. I'd be happy, after everyone's had a chance to answer questions, to speak with you further about some ideas I have about the specific rules regarding those mandates. But to your point, it can't just be you go up to your, you know, local priest and ask them to sign a form.
I would add, I'm a huge fan of Cher's proposal here for mandated service. I would, if I got to vote on it tomorrow, I would. I look at the experience of both of my grandfathers and my father serving in the military and their ability, having bunked with, served under, served over people who were not from a farm in Minnesota, a fishing village in Maine, and sort of a suburb in Maine, to interact with, work with, deal with, create solutions with, execute on plans with. They have this ability that I don't see in a current generation of people who haven't had that service, and that's just military service. There are lots of other services that create opportunities for folks to live with each other, work with each other, that we just have fewer of these days. So I'm a huge fan.
Josh is my first volunteer. He is between the ages of 18 to 20.
Sure.
Great. Any other questions? This woman here in the second row in the black and white dress? Could you please do it just for the live stream audience? Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Just for them.
Totally fine.
Shout out to the millions watching at home.
Yes.
Millions watching at home. To this amazing woman who spoke about voting. Love the idea of the compulsory voting, but also recognizing that a lot of marginalized communities, I mean, striking fear in making something mandatory. So I'm wondering why, how did you get to that? And maybe like interim steps, like going out into these marginalized communities and encouraging voting by mail, voting early, recognizing that several communities and people of color were discouraged from going to the polls because of presences at the polls that would just, I'm gonna go home.
No, I agree. First of all, the word compulsory is icky sounding in general, so it kind of sounds off-putting just by calling it compulsory voting, so I would hope to find something nicer to call it. The other piece is that what I envision more broadly is a voting holiday, an ability to vote anywhere, including a safer community. Because you're right, I had friends voting in 2004 in Tallahassee, Florida. There were polling places they absolutely would not go as people of color. So that's definitely something that I would incorporate into this. I came to it because I read a study or an article was sent to me by my mentor here at the Emerging Leaders Program. And
insert plug here.
Which sort of actually solidified this, because I think engagement is critically important to getting what you need in your communities on a local level. But what kind of solidified it is that there was a poll done of folks and what Americans think about compulsory voting or mandatory voting. And if you look at it, Black and brown folks, even though they don't overwhelmingly want it, they have a larger portion that do want it than their other voting peers and or folks that are not of color, white folks. So that I found compelling because it's like, if you make it mandatory, they can't take it away from you.
Great. So unfortunately, this is all the time we have right here in this format. We're going to do something slightly different tonight. We are going to, as you may note in the back, there are highboy tables set up with all the names of each of the presenters. We are going to have something of a networking reception where you can ask some more of these in-depth questions that you might have. There's 8 people here. There's certainly not enough time for everyone in the audience to ask their questions. So we invite you to join us and stay for the next hour. The cash bar will be open. Our ELs are friendly folk. They also love talking about these projects because we've talked about them quite a lot. So I'd invite you to stay with us at the networking reception. We also have other emerging leaders, both past and present, in the room. And if you're interested in the Emerging Leaders Program, perhaps for applying in the future, I'd welcome you to ask them more questions about what the program's all about. Please join me in thanking our presenters today in the Emerging Leaders class of 2018.